So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So our weekly portion this week is Torah, and that's usually considered a text that bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs don't want to have. It's an eye-glazing text. It's about skin disease. But I think, in fact, Metzora has one of the richest, most resonant, and most universal insights of the human condition, in all the Torah, even though it gets a lot of bad press. So the word Metzora is often translated as a leper, but when you actually read it and look at the whole context, the idea of it and the word that's the leitmotif in the portion is eruption. As in something unpleasant, something unwell, something dysfunctional, something not good for your life erupts. And most frequently, it erupts on your skin. And so you have some kind of a horrible skin disease. And that's what usually gets all the press. But what the portion also does is it talks about a house that has sara'at, a house that has leprosy, a house that has an eruption of something unpleasant. And here's the trajectory that we're going to look at, just to frame it out. We're going to see that the Torah itself treats this where a house all of a sudden has mold or fungus or something unwell, unhealthy on the bricks of the house and on the coating, the mortar of the house. And the Kohen starts by trying to tweak it and take out the affected bricks and the affected bonding agent, the mortar, and then give it time. And then if the house continues to have this mold, they destroy the entire house. The entire house is condemned. So that's the story of a house that has leprosy, or a house that has an eruption, or a house that has fungus or mold that grows. Now, most bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs don't really want to talk about that. Hence the PR problem Metzora has. But the Talmud does a move, and we'll see the Talmud. This is for the tractate Sanhedrin. And it says, do not read this story literally. In fact, the majority view in the Talmud was that there was never a case of such a house. The majority view in the Talmud is that the entire purpose of this house, of this passage in the Torah that we'll look at, is to treat it metaphorically and to ask, what is it that makes a home life not healthy? What is it that makes a home feel like our home has a plague in it? What is it that makes a home life feel like people in this home cannot thrive? In other words, as the Talmud will render it, and this is just such an important insight, a home is a living being. We usually think of humans as living beings, and a home and a house is the structure of bricks and mortar. But the Talmud's read is just of this is so much deeper, that a home is a living being. By the way, you know that's true of synagogues too. 385 Ward Street is not bricks and mortar. 385 Ward Street is a living being. Homes and spiritual homes, so too offices, are living beings. They can have beautiful cultures that bring out the best in people. And of course, they can have, the word of the day is toxic cultures that bring out the worst in people. And the same thing is true about a home. And the Talmud says, when you think about this passage, think about your home life. What makes your home life thrive? What makes your home life not thrive? What makes your home life toxic? Okay. Then we're going to take a look at the story from Elizabeth Strout, which obviously is about a home life that starts out as toxic, where a husband and wife that have been married for 42 years have not really been talking for 35 of them. And their house literally has duct tape down the middle of the house, his side and her side, and obviously some complicated relationships with the children. And yet it ends seemingly that the title of the story is the end of Civil War days. So we have to think about what is it that enabled the Civil War days in that house to end? How did they make peace? What does that teach us about how a leprous house can end the plague? And then I want to bring this to our Passover Seders and how these issues are refracted through the Haggadah. So that is our agenda for today. So good to see you. So let's take a look. Rhiannon, if you can please get us page 1 and page 2 of our handout, which will just get us into it. And if you can go down a little bit on page 1. Okay, perfect. So now many of you know of places, or you've been in houses, or you have friends who have houses that have mold. That's what the prompt is. Right? This section deals with some sort of mold, blight, or rot, perhaps of a fungoid nature, that produce recessed lesions, discoloration, and the plaster or mud used to cover building stones. Okay, that's the context. And then let's just see real quick, like what happens. There's a 2-tiered system here. So Rhiannon, if I could have page 2, please. With you in mind, raising the bar. Okay, and if everyone can please unmute, right? So the owner of the house comes and tells the priest, saying something like a plague has appeared on my house, right? There's this greenish, gooey-ish, reddish streaks, etc. And so what happens? The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague, so that nothing in the house may become impure. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. If, when he examines the plague in the walls of the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall. This is why bar mitzvah kids are not running to this portion. The priest shall come out of the house to the entrance of the house and close up the house for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return. If he sees that the plague has spread on the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out, cast outside the city into an impure place. The house shall be scraped inside all around, and the coating that is scraped off we'll keep taking some more there, Rhiannon. We can have the next page. Thank you. Shall be dumped outside. That's good. Outside the city in an impure place. They shall take other stones and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house. So the first thing they do is they essentially try to tweak it, try to deal with the symptoms, try to get the stones that are discolored with mold and the plaster that's discolored with mold away, and then hopefully it will heal. But last piece of this, if the plague again breaks out in the house after the stones have been pulled out and after the house has been scraped and replastered, that is to say, there's something systemic. There's something systemic. Even when you get the stones and the plaster out, that's just the symptom. That's not the root cause. So the priest shall come to examine if the plague has spread in the house. It's a malignant eruption. That's this word eruption, sarad. It's an eruption of badness, an eruption of something unhealthy. It's impure. The house shall be torn down, its stones and timber and all the coating on the house, and taken to an impure place outside the city. So, Rhiannon, if you can come back to the full screen for a minute. So at the moment in this conversation, this is a building problem. This is a structure problem. This is about bricks and mortar that somehow has fungus on it. And that's interesting in and of itself. But what the Talmud is going to do is make it dramatically more important. Which I'll get to the Talmud in a second. But first, I just want to see if anyone has any comments, thoughts, or questions. Nobody ever studies this stuff because it's just so unpleasant and so gross. Who's going to think about moldy bricks? But bear with me, the Talmud's going to take it to a deep place. But before we get to the Talmud, anyone have any thoughts, comments, or questions about the Torah portion itself? You guys are like bar and bat mitzvahs throughout history. No one's a big taker on Torah, but okay, bear with me. Rhiannon, if we can please have page 4, which I think is the Talmudic section. Or page 5, rather. Okay, so this is in the Talmud. This is Tractate Sanhedrin. And it's part of this is a part of a longer series in the Talmud where the Talmud deals with some pretty horrible laws in the Torah that make a modern person very uncomfortable, like the Bein Sorer Umoreh, which is the wayward and defiant child, and the parents in the end take this kid to the town square and ask the elders of the town square to stone their child to death. It's like, oh my God. I'm glad I was not there in Hebrew school when they were teaching that one, and who needs this, right? And so the rabbis say that story never happened. You're just supposed to talk about parenting, what makes good parenting, what makes challenging parenting. That's the context, okay? It's in that context that we have the following, whose opinion is reflected in the following baraita. There never was a tzara'at afflicted house. That is to say, what we just read never happened, nor will there ever be one in the future. Lo haya v'lo atid lihiyot, right? Lo haya, it never was. There was never a case of this. V'lo atid lihiyot, it will never happen. So then they asked, v'lo menechtav, then why was it written in the first place? Drosh v'kabel schar, expound it and receive the reward for doing so. In other words, the entire point of this is to do what we're doing now, to have a conversation. This is not bricks and mortar. This is about life and culture and values. What makes not a house in need of a repair? What makes a home in need of a repair? And then there's a view, there's a dissenting view, of course, this being a Jewish text, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There's a couple other rabbis who say, no, there was one. In the history of mankind, there was one house that was a tzara'at afflicted house, but the majority view is it's just there to talk about and to discuss what makes home life healthy and what makes a home life unhealthy, because a home is a living being. So with that, Rhiannon, I'll come back. And now comes the fun part of this class, the crazy story that I asked you to read by Elizabeth Strout, the end of Civil War days. First, we'll plug that story into this framework. But first, what did you think of the story? Did you like the story? Did you think I should have my head examined for asking a synagogue group to read a story about a dominatrix, etc.? So what were some general reactions to this story? Leslie, are you raising your hand? Anyone want to speak or put your desire to speak in the chat? Happy to call on you. Maddie Donoff, what did you think of the story?
Well, I had a deja vu experience because I've read it before.
Okay.
And I can't remember whether we discussed it in our group at some point. Okay, I see John and Dixie shaking their heads. I know my book group read it. We are somewhat obsessed with Elizabeth Strout. I thought it was a very sad and yet hopeful story. And all of her stories don't always have happy endings. So I kind of like this one. But I couldn't imagine how anyone could live with someone for so many years in that kind of an atmosphere, which is so toxic. And clearly they were looking for all kinds of ways to get across those yellow lines.
Right. But I know we have studied this story before, but I wanted to bring it to you again in the context of the leper's house, because it kind of makes the point in a vivid way of a house that has a plague upon it, of a house where there's an infection that is much deeper than something a repair person can fix. Here you literally have a duct tape down the middle of the house, and you have a fundamental brokenness in the house. And so it just felt like it really embodied the idea of the rabbis that there could be such a thing as a home life that is deeply dysfunctional, and that's what we need to explore. Other just general reactions to this story. John.
Unfortunately, there are such marriages. As someone did a lot of couples therapy over 50 years, they do exist where they go on and on and on, and nothing gets changed. It is sort of like a physical house. It gets mold. Unless you take care of it, it spreads. And these people never seemed to get any help. They just went back to their grudges, made them stronger, went back to their sides, and it got worse. It must have been intolerable to live in, certainly for them and for their daughters, which is why neither of their daughters were around anymore.
Right.
So you gotta do something about it. It isn't going to go away on its own. I have some ideas why it went away, but that's later.
Yeah, I'll be asking you that in a minute, but it does kind of make the point that there is such a thing as a home that has a vibe, that has an energy, that has a life, that brings out the best or brings out the worst. And in this case, Lisa and Lori didn't really care for each other. Lori was divorced. She had a sad kid named after a dog. Lisa ends up becoming a dominatrix, which is, probably not on anybody's menu of great options. How that happened. So there was just some fundamental brokenness that really, like a mold, afflicted and spread to every member of this home. So that's why I wanted to bring this story to you again, because it does feel like it kind of concretizes this idea of a house mold, of an existential mold that just spreads. Other reason, then we do have to take, John, we got to talk about, it's the end of the Civil War days. And at the end, of Ethel is stroking the arm of Fergus in the hospital. It seems like there's a warming up of this marriage after 35 years of the duct tape. And the question is, what is it that brought that healing about? But first, general reactions. Debbie Ginsburg.
I'm getting the Elizabeth Strauss stories mixed up, but I think her later one, where Olive is in a nursing home, isn't that where one of the, not assisted living home, isn't that where one of the residents is the woman from this story who raves about her late husband, how wonderful he was and what a good marriage they had? Isn't my recollection correct?
I haven't read that story recently, so I can't speak to it. If other people can, by all means. I just don't remember it. Linda Leffert. Linda, you're muted, please.
I'm just curious about why the example of a dominatrix, which is pretty extreme, especially her descriptions of it, were considered particularly relevant to make this point. I mean, it's kind of a way out of the norm, I think, kind of pretty extreme. And I was just wondering, I didn't get a sense of, why was that necessary to the story? Why did they pick that, except maybe just because it was a relatively extreme choice?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it represents. So let's go to the merits then, Linda. Andrew Sullivan's book, Far from the Tree, begins with the line, "There is no such thing as reproduction, only production." Right? There is no such thing as reproduction. Parents who think they're going to have a child who's like the parents, that's not going to happen. There's no such thing as reproduction. There's only production. And Ethel and Fergus having a daughter who is a dominatrix, that is an extreme version of otherness. So much so the main thing that Ethel says in the whole short story is, "I just don't understand. I just don't understand." She kind of cannot even begin to wrap her head around what her own daughter does. That's an extreme version of "there's no such thing as reproduction, only production." Fergus has a sense of it, understands it, and is just thoroughly disgusted by it. So you have here a case of a child who engenders in one parent just complete lack of understanding, incomprehension. I mean, what you are is incomprehensible to me. And in the other parent, what you are is disgusting to me. So to me, I think the function of the dominatrix is that it pushes those two impulses of my child is incomprehensible. Like, why, what are you saying? What is it? What? Say that again, what? That like incomprehension to an extreme. And then it also pushes the, I get exactly what you do, and it's disgusting to me. I'm appalled. I am appalled by what you, my dear daughter, are doing. So I think it's so extreme because it does that. It also has the additional benefit of being able to inspire revulsion in Lori, her sister. So I figured, I mean, I didn't write it, I'm just reading it, but it seems to have had that function. So here's my question. Given the brokenness of the home, and it's for 35 years, and given the extreme, Lori is divorced, Lisa is a dominatrix, Ethel and Fergie are, trapped in a extremely challenged marriage. What is it that brings about the healing such as it is at the end? What does this story teach us about how to heal our home life? John, you said you had some ideas in that regard.
I think the key to the story, although I think it's somewhat fantastical that it's actually going to work, is acceptance. Before he falls down, they're all sitting around watching the videotape of the dominatrix and have allowed themselves to at least look at it. Lori has said, let's look at this. I've talked to my sister. Ethel is there sitting, watching. Fergus comes in and starts to watch, and then he collapses. So it's even, they have begun to accept even this very, very out type of behavior from Lisa. And then I think when he has his illness, and she visits him in the hospital, she, by stroking him to some extent, has accepted his infidelity from 35 years before, at least for now. And then at the very end, he asks her to continue the stroking. So he also wants some healing at that point. Again, whether it will last, we don't know, but that wasn't Elizabeth Strout's
Right.
story.
Yeah. So John, I think acceptance or, kind of a radical acceptance is in part, I think my read of it is it's a little bit more nuanced and a little more granular than that, because in the climactic scene, which is page, I'll just read this, page 237 of it. Lori and Ethel are finally watching the video, and what she does is indescribably gross, right? And it does seem like Ethel and Lori, the mother and the daughter, somehow try to accept what their sister does, right? But Fergus comes in. He's not been on the ground floor of watching this. He comes in, and then he says, when he hears about what she did, he says, "You did this?" And Lisa looked down and said, "That's his thing, Dad." And then he faints. My read of Fergus fainting, when he doesn't really watch the video like his wife and other daughter, he walks in on the video. He hears that kind of obscene highlight of it or low light of it, as the case may be, and then he faints. My read of it is that Elizabeth Strout gives us two paths. One is acceptance, and the other is resignation, like throwing up your hands. Like, this is just above my pay grade. I don't get it. And he faints. And it feels to me like both of those moves are part of the menu of healing. Seeing and accepting Lisa for who she is, that appears to be what Lori does, the sister. That appears to be what Ethel does, the mother. Like, okay, I have a curiosity. This is not my thing. It's your thing. Okay, I'm going to sit and watch and be curious and learn. That's the mother and sister's thing. Fergus can never get there. he throws up his hands and literally faints. He's just so disgusted. And like resignation and acceptance of, I can't change this, I don't understand it, I don't approve of it, I don't get it, I don't like it, but it is what it is. And it feels like that's his move. Other reads on the what was it that enabled there to be an end of the Civil War days? Maddie and then Paul Kalis.
I was thinking about the very first paragraph in which it says that they barely spoke to each other, but in those days, back then, there was no forgiveness and no divorce. But I'm not so sure that that really is the case. There is something that kept them together, even though they were apart. I see John is shaking his head, that there was some comfort in being able to stay together, in being able to physically see each other every day, even though they talked around each other, etc. So there had to be some climactic situation that could bring them back together, because that's why they hung around. They were waiting for that moment. It's too bad he fell and hurt his head, but they were waiting for the moment when they could stop doing this. It took a little longer than
and Maddie, in that read, in your read that you're advancing now, what's the lesson? What's the Torah of this story about how to heal our home life?
Well, you shouldn't wait 35 years because the opportunity may never happen. This situation, circumstances brought them back together, but they could have gone on forever and never had that opportunity. So I think you have to wake up each morning and say, forget about what I was mad about yesterday. It's probably really about not carrying a grudge, because it only festers and makes it worse.
Okay. Paul Kalis and then Andrea.
Yeah, I think that very little was resolved. The mere stroking of his arm is akin to petting a dog. Now, we are interpreting it as resolving something or beginning the resolving of something, but it could have just been a human characteristic to pat someone who is suffering. So I think very little was resolved by what we've just been talking about.
Okay. Andrea.
I was sort of on Maddie's wavelength, that I think there were strong bonds between the parents and the children in their own way brought the parents together by this extreme action, because I don't think either parent wanted to lose the children. The father especially had a particular fondness for the dominatrix, and so I think there was some strength of bonds there, and I think the sisters had bonds as well that needed to be crashed open somehow, and that those bonds were there, which helped.
Andrea, thank you. I wanna, John, and then we're gonna pivot to the Haggadah for a second.
I see resignation as part of acceptance, not approval, but just saying this is what it is. I think every parent has to realize that they don't have control over their kids or anyone else, but you have to deal with what is. What was interesting to me is preceding that in the story, he throws away all the Civil War stuff.
Yeah.
Accepting or resigning himself to the fact that this is no longer important. I want to move on.
Why does he do that, John? What's your read about why he throws out all the Civil War stuff?
I think he realizes it's sort of silly. It's not terribly relevant anymore to anybody, and it was his way of getting out of the house, by the way.
Right.
Not being there when his daughter was there. And I think he realizes that this doesn't make sense, that I'm out there in a pup tent while my daughter's here from out of town. And I think he realized, I've had enough of this. Maybe
right.
He's back wearing his kilt, walking around town. Maybe more fun, but I think he's coming to some sort of terms with where he is in life.
Good, good. Also, I think, there's perhaps an awareness that this whole pattern did not bring out the best in him. He had the meaningless one-night stand that was kind of an embarrassment to him and the other woman, and he sees her again, and maybe he just realizes this is not making me the best version of myself, and so for all those reasons, he changes. Okay, I want to pivot now to the Seder table that we will be sitting down to in 10 days, Friday night, April 15th. The Seder is the ultimate embodiment of home life, right? We've been talking about home and what makes a home culture thrive and warm and healthy, and what makes a home culture challenged and maybe even dysfunctional, and how do you make our home culture better? And it feels like the Seder table is really a laboratory for the kinds of forces that come to play in terms of navigating the complexities of a home life. And to me, the passage that most vividly brings this to the surface is Arba Abanim, the 4 different children, because the Haggadah speaks here of a reality, which is people are different. And it's in those differences that you can get misunderstanding and challenge. So Rhiannon, if you can go to page, I'm trying to think if it's page, keep going, go about another 10 pages or so, about page 17, 18. Keep going past the short story. Okay, now here we go. And if you can go a little bit so we can see this. So this is going to be, this is the 4 children. And the title of Robert Paul Smith's classic book, Where Did You Go Out? Where Did You Go Out? What Did You Do? Nothing, captures the withdrawal and boredom that adult questions so frequently evoke in children. Both on the street and in the classroom, adults assume that it's their right to engage children in questions, etc. And this is about the child who does not want to communicate is perhaps the 4th child. So how do you deal with children, and in general, how do you deal with other human beings, adults as well, who are very different from you? So Rhiannon, if you can go down another page, please. And go down another page as well, please. And go down one more page as well, please. Okay, so here you have, this is in this, the Haggadah from the Hartman, which notes that there are different personality types. Dear curious child, you're always asking such great questions. You are so curious and eager to learn about Judaism, about your family history. But I have a question or two for you. First, what or who turned you on to learning? Second, is it a secret burden to be the family's good kid? Then there's the angry child. Okay, maybe I have gone overboard with my tough love. Perhaps I have followed the Haggadah's parents in excluding their wicked child, but I know how hurt parents feel because you two have spoken to me at times with such chutzpah, putting down your whole Seder thing. But I do know how you feel beneath the skeptical facade. Talk to me. I promise not to be judgmental. After all, I too was a rebel against my parents and their Judaism. So you have the curious child, the angry child, sweet child. I must tell you what a joy and relief it is to have a child as easy as you. I'm always happy to listen to your questions. Still, sometimes I worry, will you ever become more critical and independent-minded like your older siblings? And then quiet child. Talking comes so easily to me that I don't always understand what is hidden in your head and in your heart. How do I get through to you? So Rhiannon, you can go back to the full screen. So this is a different kind of a lens on the 4 children. Instead of wise, wicked, simple, and doesn't know how to ask, offering us different personality types curious, angry, sweet, quiet. What does this whole trope in the Haggadah that people are different? What is the message of this to you as you think about your own family life? Anybody? We're thinking our general issue is how do we make our home life better? And the Haggadah's main entrant into that question, I think, is this. Linda Leffert, please.
It's always a little easier if you're dealing with a child who's like you, the way you are. I think that's easier to understand. I think it's always more of a challenge when, with respect to anything, your children are very different. I remember always reading the Haggadah, it seemed that the choices were pretty stark and extreme in a way. And I think it's interesting. Before reading this, I hadn't seen this description of the 4 different types. So I think that's interesting. I think that was interesting to read and another way to look at it. And maybe more in line with what most people may be thinking now, especially as opposed to the one that was so, the first one that she just says here about, what to do with the child who's really recalcitrant, not have any rahmanis or any feeling, of positivity.
Yeah, one thing about the page that we just read is that the parent figure responds to each of these children, first of all, seeing them for who they are, right? It doesn't begin with the parent, it begins with the child. You, my dear child, are curious. You, my dear child, are angry. You, my dear child, are sweet. You, my dear child, are quiet. And in each case, if you look at it, you'll see that she or he, the parent, asks a question of this child, and the question is keyed to their propensity, to their personality type, as a way of opening up a conversation. And it feels to me like that's some good wisdom for how to improve our home life, which is to see the differences in the people who are around our Seder table, where everybody is different, everybody brings their humanity that's unique. So do we see that humanity? And then are we curious about that humanity? Do we respond with questions? Tell me more. I think tell me more is one of the most helpful things you could ever say. Tell me more about you. Tell me more about your thinking. And all of those passages we read are some version of tell me more about how you see the world. You can never go wrong with that. Dixie.
Responding to this on a very visceral level. This is the first time in 3 years that all of our 3 sons will be coming back to Newton and will be celebrating with us. They are all adults. I am thinking that it is important for me to take them where they are, to understand where they are. However, I think it is presumptuous of me to assume that it is up to me and to John to ask all the questions. It seems that it is also extremely important for them to ask questions about the entire procedure. It is a mutuality of a reciprocity. I don't think it is all going to happen around the table. Hopefully it can happen in the greater context of the entire happening. You might have taken from what I'm saying that there is some animosity among our sons, which there is. And I don't think it is up to me at this point in my life to heal all of that. I think that they also must assume responsibility.
Mhm. Thank you, Dixie. How do you feel about hosting, all of your kids for the first time in 3 years?
I have many feelings. I am very pleased to have the opportunity. That is number one. Number two, I am also anxious about it, fearful a bit. I want to be open to what will happen and what they will bring. But I will also admit to not wanting to be hurt or not wanting to be particularly pained.
Mm. And what would be particularly concerning in that regard?
I'm not sure that I want to hear and bear witness to whatever it is that each of them might be feeling.
Mm.
And on their most intimate level. I feel perhaps that I should be willing to do that. And I'm thinking, oh, give me a bright, beautiful facade. Wouldn't I prefer that? Wouldn't I prefer smiles and light, no real exchange of what one is feeling? Give me some peace.
Mm.
I'm telling you what I honestly feel with all of its complexities and messiness.
I really appreciate that, Dixie. How would you compare the emotion / apprehension of going from in-person to a Zoom Seder 2 years ago? I mean, you remember 2 years ago in Pesach 2020, that Zoom Seder was such an oxymoron, such an existential oxymoron. They just create, like, how do you do a Zoom Seder? That just, right? How do you compare that emotion of Zoom from in-person to Zoom Seder to now 2 years later, from Zoom Seder to in-person?
Well, Zoom Seder was easier.
Yeah.
It was a chance to keep distance. And I'm not sure this is exactly to your question, but having had these years to distance and become fearful and understand, that's made it more painful. The possibility of pain easier.
Right. So Dixie, thank you so much. I think what you're sharing is true in different ways for every person on this Zoom call, which is, to the extent that we're all going in different ways from a Zoom Seder to an in-person Seder, we are inviting people into our life more immediately. And when you invite people into your life more immediately, you invite the complexity of people, the layeredness of people, the ambiguity and ambivalence of people in a more direct way. When you're on a Zoom call, as you all know, you press click and you're done. It's gone. It's like all that complexity is a click here and it's a click away and it's gone. And that's just much more antiseptic and clean and easy than actually sitting down with somebody, especially if they have to get in an airplane and travel, and especially if they're in their high school bedroom, then in person. And so we're all living in the land of complexity that's in person, that is greater. And so hence I wanted to share some lenses for the complexity of home life, and to me, the passage for the Haggadah about seeing people for who they are in their uniqueness, the humility and curiosity of asking them questions, genuinely wanting to learn from them, And also to your point, it's reciprocal. You're not just you're not the judge asking questions of litigants, right? This is a relationship, and they would hopefully ask you and be curious about you. All of that goes in the mix of a healthier home life. So thank you for that. Any other last comments, thoughts, or questions, as all of us are facing a brave new world? It's not an unfamiliar world. It was the pre-2020 world, but it's now 2 years since we've done this. So any other last comments, thoughts, or questions about how to have a happier and healthier home life and a happier and healthier Seder? Anyone? So with that, I wanted to wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. May you see deeply all the people around your Seder table. May you be deeply curious about them. May they see you and be deeply curious about you. May you have Seders and a home life full of love and mutual respect. And I will see you all again the first Tuesday after Passover. Thank you so much, guys. Chag Sameach.